Okay, so lecture 2, this is an introduction to HTTP. Last time we talked a little bit about the internet and why it was built. I'll ask questions about that when I'm not recording. But so now the internet, when I talk about the internet, I'm talking primarily about how computers were physically connected to each other and the rules that they were used, called TCP/IP, that had the computers passing little packets of information back and forth as an alternative to phone lines. So that was sort of the structure of the internet. When we think of the internet, we think of like websites, like what I'm looking at right now. This is what we usually describe as the internet. This is something that really, more or less, one guy thought of. This guy, Tim Berners-Lee, if we were to say one guy made the internet, it'd be this dude. And Tim Berners-Lee, and he's still alive. He's like a really, really nice guy. He's really passionate about some political issues about how the internet's being handled by governments around the world. So that's a side topic that you should look into if you want to talk more about the ethics of computer science. So that's really neat, and you can click on his website to see what he's all jacked up about. But really, he really made this HTTP thing. So the reason why we say HTTP on the start of our websites is because that's Hypertext Transfer Protocol. It's how we packaged a website like this, which is programmed in a language called HTML. It's how we bundle this code up and pass it along the structure of the internet that we talked about last lesson. So this guy said, okay, you built this TCP/IP network. That's cool. You want information to be transferred over this. I've got a solution. And the guy was just sick and tired of using microfiche. I had to use this in college to research a lot of old articles before they were all digitized. They were on these little films here. And so you had this little film called a microfiche, and you put it in this machine, and then you could see a zoomed up version of this scanned little text. And so you had to go through this little card, and there's little handles here that allow you to pan around on this old archived newspaper or whatever. And so it was a pain. It was not a fun job. And what he really wanted to do, and what researchers really wished for, was a link. That, just like this is called a hyperlink. And so they wanted to just be like, oh, you want to know more about CERN? Okay, just click here. And now you can learn more about what CERN is. Really neat. And so this is where the internet was born, was this thing called CERN. And again, when I say the internet, where websites were born, was CERN. The fundamental structure of the internet was an American Defense Department creation, but the websites themselves were a European creation as a way of replacing microfiche. And so that someone could click on a link and just be magically transported to another body of text. So they didn't have to fish out another microfiche and go scanning around. So that link was and that's why when we study links, and I'll have some code down here, when we study links, the first element is an A. So an A element, when you say bracket A, that's a hyperlink. And it starts with an A because that was the first element created, was the ability to make a link. And the href stands for hyperlinks reference. So if I click on this link, where does it go? It goes to google.com. So this is your first bit of HTML, and that is, I'll get back to that in a second. Okay. So HTTP is a set of rules of how I can send a message over the TCP/IP network from the last class. And I send a little request and say, if I type in a website like google.com and press enter, it sends a GET request to the Google server. And so it uses DNS that we talked about last time, changes it to an IP, sends a message over there and says, hey, I'm looking for this website. And then it responds back with a package of HTML And so my HTTP response will include a bunch of text in HTML code, and then my browser knows how to handle that. And then if there are other types of requests besides a GET request is get me this page. But I can also do a POST request. So if I send an email, I'm sending a POST request to the Gmail server saying, here's my bit of HTML, do something with this. And depending on what website I'm going to, it'll handle that differently. But if I'm at Gmail and I send a POST request saying, here's my email, please send this to this address, then it'll handle that server, and the response will be a little notification saying email sent. So there are different types of HTTP requests and different types of responses, but fundamentally it passes HTML code back and forth, and that was the brainchild of this dude. And it's really neat in computer science that we can point to single guys and say, yeah, this guy totally revolutionized how the world works. And there's a couple examples of that. It's not very common. Usually there are teams of people working on things, but every now and then there's like, hey, this one person figured it out. And it's not always a dude either. Like the lunar lander, the person that programmed how the Apollo lander managed to land on the moon by automation was a woman using punch cards. So it's not all guys doing this stuff. Anyway, cool. So let's go over some basics of HTML. A tag looks like this. This is what a tag is. There is no such thing as a tag. A tag is not an actual element. I'm just using this as an example. A tag has a start and an opening tag and a closing tag. So there's a famous T-shirt that has an opening tag at the front of the shirt, and it says nerd, and then at the back of the shirt behind, and it says /nerd. So at where your chest is, where this shirt starts, that's where the nerd starts. In between is you, so you are the nerd. And at the back, it says closing nerd, so that's where the nerd ends. So just the contents of an element are what's inside. The tag just defines where it starts and where it stops. So that's a tag. An element is whatever is inside this tag. So I already told you there is no such thing as a tag element. But there is a link element. And so a link or a hyperlink uses the element A. And then inside you have properties. And so these are called property couplets because they're in pairs. It's always the property and then in quotes the value. So there are many different types of properties, and you can make your own up. It doesn't mean the browser will know what it means, but you could develop code that looks for a certain property that you made up that allows you to pass extra information along to an element. But a standard property for all links is the hyperlink reference about where this link goes to. So that's a tag, and that's an element. And again, you're going to be taking some online courses on codecademy.com. That's your homework. There are other websites called SoloLearn where you can take HTML fundamentals, and they'll walk you through these basics, give you an opportunity to try some simple things out. And programming is all about sort of trying on your own. So it's sort of a lazy cop-out as a teacher saying, hey, you just have to do it on your own. But you really do. And it'll change. The new HTML6 will come out, and it'll change a lot of the things. And you'll be out of this class when that happens, and you'll just have to learn on your own. It's something that if you take computer science seriously, you have to just sort of always include a little bit of time to keep independently learning. And it's fun. I mean, once you get the hang of it, and then it's neat how this stuff is growing and changing. Okay, so that's a tag. And that's an element. Now let's look at what a basic website looks like. All websites have a couple commonalities. So this is an example of a very, very simple web page. And so it starts with a solo tag. When I say a solo tag, I don't know if that's the proper term for it. Something I just mnemonically call a tag that doesn't have a closing element. So it's a solo tag in that there is no slash close. So it starts with an exclamation point and it just says doctype HTML. So it just reassures your browser, as Google Chrome in my instance, that hey, this code that you're looking at, this is a website. It's a document that's in HTML, as opposed to JavaScript or CSS, which are also used in this browser and that we'll talk about later. So like this is a standard HTML, the core of all the internet. And then you have an HTML element. So the HTML, all websites that you've ever gone to in your entire life have all been the body of an HTML element. So HTML starts and then HTML close. So hypertext markup language. ML stands for markup language. It's not a programming language. So if someone says, hey, are you learning to program? No, I'm learning to code because I'm learning a markup language, not a programming language. Meaning I'm learning how to make things look real pretty, not doing any complex thinking. JavaScript, that's a programming language. It does logic and calculations. Markup language does layouts and structure. Okay, so now I have the head element. Head element includes things like page title, and that's what you see up here. These are page titles, and those are in the head. You don't really see the head on the body of the page. The body of the page is inside the body element, and this you have H1 for header 1, and then a paragraph for paragraph. So that's the basic structures. We're going to practice that right now. But first, CSS, I want to just show CSS is HTML site. You can't program CSS on its own. CSS is only a buddy language to HTML. It determines styles. Let's say you wanted all of your paragraphs to be a certain font. Well, you could program that by hand here, but really you can link a CSS file to this, and then you can set rules saying it's like the dress code for all your paragraphs and all your headers and backgrounds and all this other stuff. You can target elements in CSS and apply style rules. So it's cascading style sheet. So cascading because it has a series of rules and priorities. So you can have one rule overwrite others. So the more specific you are, the more it overwrites. So you can say all boys must wear a blue shirt, except for you, Harry, you have to wear a green shirt. So because it's more specific, it overwrites the more general rule. And that's why it's cascading. We'll look at that. We're going to practice that. Right now we're just laying in some terms. And so there are some rules. CSS is a different language, but it gets wrapped into JavaScript. Into HTML. And so that describes it right there. But really, we'll go back over and hit these rules again. I'm going to stop this little video explanation and let's start tinkering around. And so to tinker around, we're going to go to codepen.io. You don't need to make an account if you don't want to. We're just going to make something goofy real quick as practice. And if you're watching this and you don't have me available to go over this stuff with you, then just go to sololearn.com or codecademy.com and pick up an HTML course, which you're going to have to do for homework anyway, and start plugging away.